Hi, this is Josh. We're just doing some research for the causal analysis essay, and I wanted to walk people through library database research and some do's and don'ts. First thing is just to overview the assignment. Make sure you're always reading audience and purpose and the types of sources allowed. In this case, at least 3 outside sources. Library databases, ebooks, books, not websites, so we're not starting with a Google search. If you want to do a website, there's a way to do that. It's outlined in the syllabus, and I so far haven't gotten any. So what we should be seeing are library databases appearing in the sources. I'm picking one of the many topics that you have to go with, and this one's about the maternal death rate, which is quite high for a first world country. In fact, the highest in the developmental world. We also have a why question, so we're looking back in time. So to the left on the timeline of 0, we're looking back, and we're saying we have some causes for this. So just basically what led to this situation occurring. Notice we're not saying what needs to be done about it necessarily, although we could argue that a little, but basically I need to weigh the causes, state them, not just listing, but which one is the most important, which ones also play into this. We're not writing a 5-paragraph essay in this course. We're beyond that a bit. So we have to be a little sophisticated in how we do this. I just came up with some causes that I would argue that there's a class-based healthcare segregation. That'd be a big search term to come up with, but we're going to do some database searches and see what we can find. In other words, if you're rich, you get a different healthcare than if you're middle class or if you're poor. The other one is if you live in rural areas, you're far more at risk in America, and rural healthcare is not as well funded, and I could look at why that is. So this could lead to causes that have causes that have causes. So we don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but we do want to just make sure that we look at these issues. Another third reason I had was there's insufficient political will to fund prenatal care. In other words, we don't much care about the health of women before they have babies. So they're going to have higher rates of problems, complications because of the lack of funding. And notice that even in this, there's dollar signs, but the will is not there to fund it. So that leads to me talking about maybe the political system, how healthcare is funded, how states take federal money, how localities pay for the hospitals they sponsor, especially if those hospitals don't make money but actually run at a loss. All kinds of complicated statements here. So it's not a statement of fact to say there are many reasons why the U.S. maternal rate is the highest in the developed world. That is not a thesis. That's a fact. You can't argue that there's many reasons. You have to argue those reasons and how those reasons go together. I think from the ones I put together here, you could see that there's a focus on money, fairness, equity, who is able to pay versus who is able to get care. So we have health standards, which could be another cause, and then maybe they're unequally applied in different areas, which could, again, tie back to healthcare segregation. I'm going to add a fourth here. It's a little more abstract. You could argue that in America, women are not accorded or given the same value as men, and so insurance rules are unnecessarily difficult for them. Things that they have health-wise aren't paid for. Just a general devaluing of women. I, in fact, could make that my main reason, and that these other ones play into it, but I'm probably not going to do that. There's 4 reasons. That's a lot. It's going to need to be narrowed. So one of the things you might do is you could narrow it by time. You could narrow it by place. You could say, for instance, in the rural northeast of the North Country, northern New York, we're looking at a combination of these factors. Our window into this big issue is to look at northern New York, or to look at Illinois, or if you've lived in Maine or somewhere, whatever. you could do that. But you have to just narrow it so we're not writing a book. We can't have a book-length thesis. So that's big. So I might or might not be able to deal with this. So that's my thesis. I might say something like, we don't want to riff off of this too much, so we'll just list these for now. Getting a little jumbled here. A little clunky at first, but we worked it out here. The combining factors of the evaluation of women, underfunded prenatal care, indeed rural healthcare funding in general, caused by lack of political will. So in this state, I might be looking at the political will to value women, the political will to fund healthcare. But again, we don't have to solve this. We are just arguing the causes. So I'm not going to come up with some one simple solution that's going to fix all this. We're arguing why it is that this is the case. It's embarrassing and shocking. Why? And that might be something that I even have as a setup. So I might say something like, just picked a country at random here, but we're basically, comparing and contrasting and getting people set up for this thesis if, we would lead into it some way. In any case, big thesis, we have our search terms. Let's actually do a search. So I have open in, go to our website, the library page is in the drop down. I went to that. I click on articles, JCC databases. And what you're going to get is a big list. You can do it this way. Just click on the list, or you can just a general database. It's a good place to start. So I'm just going to go to the general databases. We don't have to go wild with anything. And just the login comes up. You have to log in. These are subscriber databases. And here's a couple tricks. I mean, you can go to the information literacy tutorial in that library page. Find out much more. Brush up on your skills. But we want to have at least the full text of these articles, so I'm checking full text here. We don't want summaries of articles. You can't cite from a summary. That's an abstract. You can't use those. You actually have to find and use the article. I don't have to click scholarly here and get some really high, really in-depth argument. Here we go. I could have American maternity. It's trying to auto finish this. It's annoying. So I do a search. I got 300. It's not 5. It's not 5,000. maternal mortality studies. So what you might see here are other search terms sometimes come up. Now, you're seeing some of these hits seem totally random. Risk factors for maternal death. So if I looked at that, even though it might be about other countries, low countries, middle-income countries, I'm going to see the risk factors. I can then use those as search terms. Here's one on midwives. So say I wanted to use this. I could download it. I can get to it, the actual article. I can have it, in most of these, I can have this read to, translated or even read to me if I want to have it read to me in an Australian accent. How cool would that be? You want to look at the beginnings and ends of these sorts of sources. They even go to the trouble of a lot of times linking you to, the sources they cited, like here, Planned Hospital versus Planned Home Birth. So say I use this article, there's one source. I could go to this one at the National Institute of Health, and there's another source. Often those references are very good. The conclusions, what we want to look at, and the abstract, you're not reading these from the start to the end. You're definitely not having to do that. So there might be a source, and I might even change my idea about rural healthcare to saying insufficient integration of, well, not integration, I can't use their word, insufficient use of midwives. And you could say in rural areas you can't have a ready access to doctors, maybe you need midwives. Now, one thing to notice, this source just throws a ton of citations at people. They're not very well cited. There's no parentheses here. They're bracketed for some reason. But it's an APA style. It's not in the MLA style that we must use. So if I talk about this topic, I have to realize my sources are in APA. I need to write in an MLA. Don't use the citation engine to do that. You can just look it up and apply the models. OWL at Purdue, Excelsior OWL, our handbook. But let's say I want this source. I can save this source. And there, in the very first sentence, it's telling us poor coordination of care across providers and birth settings has been associated with adverse maternal newborn outcomes. Just a little note on style here, folks, as well. When we write about medical things, we tend to think of them as obvious. Passive voice, something occurred. In our writing, we have to kind of step that up. Active voice, somebody did something. Who did what? We have to show ownership. And so, use active voice rather than this passive voice. They tell you their methods. This summary is a thumbnail sketch of the whole thing. And they have their conclusion right here. So I don't need to read the whole thing. But they're talking about a scoring system that they use and the fact that midwives are important and positive as a factor and feature. And that we don't do enough with this. So, emphasis, impact. So we want to weigh our ideas. This would be a great source that we kind of happened upon, and I would probably use it. Some of these are just totally at random. So you get this. And here's an interesting one. Pockets of progress amidst persistent racial disparities and low birth weight rates. Well, we know birth weight correlates with a lot of outcomes later on. Birth weight can be impacted by education. Birth weight can be a lot of things. So we get into correlation and causation, all kinds of issues. And let's say I clicked a PDF of this. And again, you can save these. You can copy and paste from this right into your paper, cite it as you go, and there you go. Racial disparities persist in adverse perinatal outcomes. Prenatal before, perinatal after, right? And we're talking about these factors, these features. So this could work well. It gets very dense very quickly, as you see. But here's a point, guys. If I read the title of most any of these, I can pretty much tell what it's going to argue, what its thesis would be. And I can tell if it's scholarly, and I can tell if it's popular. And don't be freaked out by 18 authors for this thing. You're going to have Goldfarb et al. If you have 4 or more authors. And because it's a PDF, I do have a page I can cite. Page 1, whatever. Now, I don't want to give people the impression that I'm just yanking sources at random. So let's actually do another search. And we'll do a Boolean search. And by that, all I just mean is saying maternal death rate and wealth. Say that class issue. I want to argue about class. You get 70 hits. Underlying determinants of maternal in rural South African population. Now, one point here, guys. If you're a good connector and you're writing about America and you have a South Africa article, what you can do is read its points, see its points, and they might be applicable. You would get to do the applying. You would have to apply the material to America. You could say something like, you know, obviously there are key differences between South America or South Africa and North America, but here's the point that remains, or here's the point that does make sense. So don't worry if you get a Swedish source or South African or Chinese, whatever. You can use it and apply it, and it gives you something as a writer to do if you're clever. You can't just plop it in and, you know, throw a big quote in, but you do want to kind of don't dismiss a source just because of these issues. So there's an interesting one. Cesarean rates. You know, we have a huge cesarean rate. Does that make us have a higher maternal death rate? Do other countries that they're, you know, either not equipped or they don't want to have cesareans? That could be a complex, interesting factor. That could become one of my causes, that we're too eager to give cesareans. Now, I'm not talking about the celebrity who wants to have a cesarean to still look great after having a baby. We're talking about other issues. But maybe those celebrities influence some of the people in the lower and middle classes to want to do that. Or maybe the doctors just find it easier than having somebody come in 6 times to the ER for preterm labor. Causes lead to other causes, lead to other causes. Is it laziness that leads the doctor to do this? Is it a funding issue? It could be all sorts of things. So I just want you to see, we want to get the full text of these things, and we can save them. They're giving you the citation information. For instance, if I go back in here, and guys, there's whole library classroom sessions on this stuff. You can get a glimpse of this in the information literacy tutorial, like I mentioned. But be careful about some of the templates, like there's model citations and that kind of thing. But they give you some keywords, and some of these might be very useful. Population metrics, population biology, something like that. So if I click on one of these, it's going to give me a whole slew of articles on that topic. So, you know, look around, look sideways. Don't dismiss a source just because it doesn't look immediately relevant. It might be irrelevant, but you might find some useful stuff. You don't read these top to bottom. It's a chaotic process, as you're starting to see. And if I go back to my list, class-based healthcare segregation, I didn't even touch that yet. So what you often find is, wow, this is too much. Let's actually look at, I'll have some sub-reasons. Midwives. Too many. So I could come up with, so all these huge ones could be even replaced or mixed in differently, and I might lead with something different. I'm not sure. The idea, folks, is just to get 3, 4. You don't have to have 5, 6 causes. You won't be able to explore them well. But have one cause that gets the most attention. The other ones could help it along. It's kind of the main one. The other ones are, maybe you only get 1 paragraph. That one could get 6 or 4 or 2. Hopefully this kind of outlines how complex causes are. If you can master this, if you can manage causes, you can do any sort of writing, any sort of argument, because there are this many types of causes: hidden, visible, primary, we'll call them direct, indirect, proximate, ultimate. In other words, a cause for something like, I can't see devaluing of women. I can't see that rural areas don't get as much money. Directly, maybe. So we have hidden, visible as one pairing, direct, indirect. A direct cause of someone dying could be unclean equipment, unclean operating rooms. An indirect cause could be a lack of management skills in rural hospitals that lead to them not having checklists for cleaning the room, which is an indirect cause of their death. They still died, but it was complicated by the causes. And that's that similar thing here. Usually things that are closer in space or time to something are visible and direct. But there could be an ultimate cause. America has never funded, prenatal and perinatal education properly or whatever. There's an ultimate cause for that. Why is that? If I can trace it all the way back, and that tends to be vague. So we don't deal in ultimate causes a lot. As one person jokes, those are called gods or God, depending on your beliefs. If you trace things all the way back, there's an ultimate cause, if you believe that. Not so worried about that. What I wanted you to focus on is sometimes the hidden causes are good to argue, and you have to weigh these. So you're not just saying, well, there are many causes, that some are these. You have to argue them and weigh them. Okay, I'll be looking for that voice of yours so that your body paragraphs are not taken over by sources. You don't begin with quotes. That you lead in with your ideas, and then the support comes from sources. That's why they're supporting sources. They don't run the show, you do. So let's see if we can do this. Hopefully this helps you sort of sort out your thesis and where you're going to go with that. And again, we're exploring what led up to these situations. We're not solving these situations. Good. Hopefully that helps you. Thanks.